Fantastic Pixel Castle and Frog Pants Studios presents Word on the Street with Greg Street and Scott Johnson.
Greetings and hello and welcome back to Word on the Street. This is our November 2024 episode 13th in a long-running series, a year.
Lucky 13.
A year and a month, Greg. Weird.
That's amazing.
Doesn't that feel like that just happened?
And we still haven't finished this game. What's wrong with us?
Yeah, what's going on? Hurry it up, you slackers. As it turns out, it takes a long time to make an MMO, but I also think you guys are making crazy progress. Maybe faster. Actually, you know what? Great question to start with. Do you think that this game is on a faster track than what you would expect from an MMO development? Or are we about where we expect to be?
I mean, we're much faster than normal MMO development. And I mean, a lot of that just comes from the fact that we don't have a ton of oversight. So in previous places I worked, so much of the when you're in charge of a team, you just spend so much of your time kind of glad handling stakeholders,
right?
Constantly reassuring them things are going okay, making sure they feel like they can veto if they're worried about the way things are going, and that just takes a lot of time. So that's been the biggest factor, is just not having that constant oversight has let us move really quickly.
So I'm picturing this. It's like in a normal, quote unquote, atypical normal situation with a project this large. It's always like, oh, guys, big breakthrough. This is awesome. Now we need to schedule time with so-and-so, and then they're in between, and then they're person above them, and then ultimately maybe CEO. We got to get, and that's hard anyway. Oh, well, he's in Malaysia for 2 weeks. We're not going to be able to talk to him.
That was my life. Yeah.
Yeah. So that sounds like a nightmare. Yeah.
On Warcraft, it was right in the middle of, not only were they figuring out the whole Overwatch, shift from Titan to Overwatch, but they were also dealing with the Warcraft movie. So it was hard to get like Metzen or Pardo or any of those guys to have enough time to like, hey, can you sit down and let's talk about the game?
Oh yeah, good point. I hadn't even really thought about that. Like there was always talk at Blizzard, like, oh, we're gonna reduce the window down to about a year for expansions, and it just never seemed to happen. Although it looks like they're making an attempt now. With the trilogy that they're doing, but
hopefully they pull it off. And I think, I have no insider knowledge, but just by having a plan, like having 3 expansions planned out, lets them work that way. Mm-hmm. When I was there, we never knew what was coming next. Like, oh crap, we finished an expansion. What's the next one going to be? Hurry up.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, we're coming off with Ghost, a couple of really intense playtests. I shouldn't say intense. I'm sort of adding drama where there is none. Maybe it was intense. I don't know. But we talked last month about a pretty targeted playtest. And then you've had a handful since, and it sounds like things are going well in that regard. So let's catch people up before we get into the meat of today's discussion. How are the recent playtests going? Big moments of like eureka or anything going on? Anything you want to mention from those tests that you can mention?
Oh yeah, so this is our 3rd month in a row. We did playtests, and by playtest I mean external, like real players, in September, October, and November, and so we had people come this time who had already played twice before. So this had been like, imagine they play for like an hour, 2 hours. They've played like 3 or 4 hours of the game now. So they get to see not only the change from the previous build, but they get to just see different blue zones every time because we generate them on the fly. So that's been really cool.
Yeah.
And then we also had our concurrency was like up to 100 from this last playtest. We had that many people. Maybe it was 80. The programmers will probably say I'm exaggerating, but it was a pretty big number. We had a lot of people at one time in the game that we could support.
And is it the most you've had at one time? As far as you know?
Yeah, definitely the most we've had. I think the first 2 playtests were about 30, and this one we ended up splitting it over 2 days because a lot of our playtesters were raiding on the day we wanted, and so we made a second day where they could catch up. And I think between those 2 days we had 140 total, but our concurrency was either 80 or 100 on the busier of the 2 days.
That's pretty great. So and no big. Well, I mean, I don't want to get into too much of the nitty gritty, but did you run into?
No. I mean, the hardware held up. That was what we were worried about. Is you're always spinning up more servers and making sure that you can partition players, but that part all worked well. I was also pleasantly surprised. We've done no like performance testing. We have high-end dev machines, so we don't worry about that, but real players don't.
Right.
And so we didn't know how was the game going to run on people with lower-end machines, but we only had a couple people that just couldn't play at all. They had like laptops with integrated graphics cards or something, but most of our playtesters, the performance was fine.
I assume anybody with like a 2080 and forward should probably be fine, right? I mean, we're talking Unreal. It is Unreal.
People who have like gaming machines who play video games. Yeah, it's Unreal. Right. But there's just a lot out there of like someone has a good graphics card but not enough RAM, or they have like a slow internet connection. There's a million hardware configurations you have to test for, and we're not at that stage in the game development. You do that before you launch, but it still worked pretty well.
Well, that's good. I suppose there's an advantage too with the engine, given that Unreal is kind of universal now and runs on everything from phones up to, high-end PCs and even beyond. So there's a lot of scalability there. Is there a temptation from the technical end of the team to want to, keep things on the lower end so that you're covering as much ground as possible? Or maybe you don't think about that at this stage, but is that a consideration?
They don't want to disappoint us, the engineering team, and they don't want to disappoint players. So they're cautious. They're like, look, we haven't tested 100 players before. Mm-hmm. Hopefully it'll work, but do you really want to find that out the day of playtest?
Yeah.
And Unreal is great, and it does a lot of stuff kind of, for free. Like, it's much easier to animate in Unreal than it was previously. But in technical terms, it's a client. It doesn't do the server part of the game at all. So we had to build the whole server architecture ourselves, and that worked, knock on wood, but it's so far so good. That's a really hard part of MMO development.
That's some of the nuts and bolts that fascinate me, though. Are you running these servers at a external rack somewhere, or is it internal right now for now? Or how are you pumping this out to people in the playtest who are obviously not in a central office? None of you are. It's a remote team. How are you all making that work?
Nobody has like this. I have the Blackhand server on my desk back here. No one has servers like that anymore. Like, they're all on the cloud on, Amazon or Microsoft or Google somewhere. Right. I don't even actually know who is providing our servers right now.
Yeah, the old days of having a shard and then keeping that shard like the Blackhand server you have back there, those are gone. We're done with that, right?
Yeah. Yep.
No longer a thing. In WoW or otherwise. Yeah. All right. Well, as these play tests continue, and I'm hoping very shortly to be a part of one, I'm excited too, because you're getting into numbers that make things really, really curious and interesting in there.
The other thing we really want to do, I don't know when they'll let me, is basically like get rid of the NDA, and then just when play testers come, they can just talk about what they experienced, and then hopefully after that we'll get to the point where people can just stream it if they want.
Oh, that's a good point. So part of this, the reason we have the show, the reason that you guys are so open about your development is to that goal of transparency throughout as much of the process as possible. Is there like a tipping point where you say, all right, no more NDA? And what does that look like?
I tend to be, more risk tolerant than most of the team. So I would do it sooner. I'm going to wait until others on the team are like, yeah, I think we're more comfortable with that. Make sure we put our best foot forward. I mean, we are super early, but right now we have really tight control of the message. And once we lose control of the message, then anyone can make their own video about Ghost, and someone could just make a video and this new MMO looks terrible, without the caveat of yeah, dude, we're years away from launch. Yeah. Because, you can't ship me with every one of those people streaming.
Right. But you've also led with this concept. I hope that sticks in messaging throughout. Right. Gamers get real weird no matter what you do or say. But at some point, I hope that messaging is always sort of man, isn't it great? I hope the way people talk about it is, man, isn't it great to see this in its skeletal form, or in this early stage? We never get to see this. And it's fascinating how you get to see it mold in real time. And isn't it great that we have a window on this? That's what I hope. I know that people get weird, and there'll be weirdness, but I guess, hopefully messaging from this show and just from us being, and you guys being as transparent as you are, that will lead. And if it does, it may bring in, who knows? I've always said this since we started this a year ago, that maybe you guys would set a new standard for the industry, or at least set one that people would be curious about and go, oh, well, what if there is another way? It doesn't have to all be locked down until E3, the 6 months before it launches or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's in players' best interest because they get to kind of weigh in on, oh, I'm excited about this feature, or, ooh, that makes me nervous. And then we have time to fix it before we're out there and we're like, oh, crap, I really wish we had known that, players thought our raids were too long, or players thought our party size was too small, or whatever it is.
You said something pre-show where nobody could hear us, and so I just kind of want to bring it up again and have you address it real quick, which is there are a couple of ways to develop as you go, and one of them is a very obvious one sounding in your head anyway, which is let's play it and add as we go. And that's versus say like more planning, more heavy duty background stuff before you get in there. Which way do you guys lean? And I guess I would ask, after all your years of experience, not only which way do you lean, but which way do you think is going to lead to, quicker milestones, faster launch, all that kind of stuff?
The only way I know how to develop is to like lead with the software. Like you can make all of these design docs in the world, and then you start implementing it, and it doesn't survive one playtest. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't count unless it's in software. The problem is sometimes building it in software can take a really long time. So you need to think through things in advance. Like you don't want to build a whole gear system in software and then realize, oh yeah, we made a really fundamental mistake. Like, our design means that we're not creating enough gear, or it looks really stupid when the big burly plateware puts on the wrong gear, or just whatever, you don't know until you try it.
Yeah.
So for a lot of stuff, we'll just try it out. Like, let's put something in the game. We've been thinking about, do we want to have grappling hooks in the game in any form? It doesn't mean you could grappling hook at a moment's notice. Maybe it's only in certain areas. Maybe it's only in certain biomes, which I think we'll talk about more in a moment. But one of the engineers like, hey, I'm going to put in grappling hooks this week and we'll see if we like it. And if we don't like it, maybe we'll take it out. Maybe we'll iterate on it. If we do like it, we'll polish it up. And that's my preferred way to do development. It just doesn't work for everything. Like, if we're going to launch with 30 classes, which is the target I've given the team, we have to have a framework for that. Probably means, I don't know, let's say it's 5 different healers. Let's make sure those 5 healers all play a little differently. So you have to kind of plan that out in advance. You won't get there organically, because probably what happens is the first healer has a bunch of really cool abilities, and then the second healer's like, oh crap, now what do we do? We already used all the good abilities on the first one.
Sure. Well, and back to your grappling hook thing, that seems like it could create an emergent experience in your playtest. So if you just have it on paper and say, well, we're going to plan on adding this, that's different than saying, all right, tonight, don't forget, everyone's got a grappling hook, bind your key. Off we go. Let's see what happens. And either it may be a nightmare and you'll never use it, or you'll go, holy crap, emergent gameplay happened tonight, and we all witnessed it. And we're going to, not only are we going to keep it. Yeah. That must be an amazing feeling to have that happen. Have you had those experiences so far with mechanics in the game?
Oh yeah, for sure. Let me try to think of some examples. We have building in the game, and by building, it's not a survival game where you have to like build a bed to sleep, or you'll die or anything like that.
Right.
But we let players build things to solve problems. And one of the first buildings we gave them was like a bridge or a ramp where you can kind of build an elevated road. And initially we were thinking, yeah, it's a bridge. There's a river you want to cross, or there's a gap, because our universe is full of kind of floating islands. You could build a bridge to the next island. But immediately players started using them for all sorts of things we didn't expect. Like, they saw something cool up in the skies, they tried to build a bridge up to it. Or the undead in the game right now spawn, this undead goo on the ground that causes damage. And so part of what you do to deal with the undead is you bust up the goo makers and clear up the ground while you're fighting the monsters. And so we saw playtesters like try to build a bridge over the goo so they could like stand on the bridge and fight down on the undead. And it's just, that wasn't why we designed it, but it's kind of cool. So maybe we'll keep it.
That's interesting. Games are like this in general. Players find their own fun sometimes, or their own solutions, as it were. And even in huge, established, many years on games like World of Warcraft, you still see that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Somebody will go, oh, look at this new raid mechanic. It's crazy. Good thing somebody's got something on their bar they've never used before, but now suddenly it's relevant because of this weird goo on the ground. It's interesting.
But players are also really used to MMOs kind of slapping their wrist when they come up with a solution. If it feels like they're breaking the rules, usually the developers will patch it out.
Right.
And so the philosophy we're trying to take, particularly with the Blue Zone, since they are private, is anything goes. And if you kind of find a way to, if you can yeet the boss off the cliff and that kills the boss, great, go you. That's not the kind of thing we'll try to immediately patch out.
Right. Yeah. There's a fine line, I guess, with what you call an exploit versus just playing the game, using the tools that are given you. That always fascinates me, just from a moderation standpoint. Like, how do you decide that hiding behind that rock gave you too much cover, and at what point was a player abusing it versus just thinking this is how it works? Like, that's fascinating to me. You guys are a long way from that.
What we want to do is we want to reward players for exploring and for feeling smart when they solve puzzles, because again, a lot of MMO design has come down to this huge focus on efficiency. And so the most efficient way to learn a raid or even to like quest is you go look it up. You go watch a video or you go read a wiki about like, well, what's the right way to gear up, or what's the right way to do this boss? And so we're really trying to embrace this notion of like, well, nobody knows because this boss has never been, created before, or this map is brand new, so no one knows what it's like here.
Right.
So if players can come up with cool solutions to solve problems, that's awesome. If they come up with a solution that's so good, like the building bridges is the solution to every fight, well, then we're kind of back to like it's a solved problem again. So for me, that's the crossover point. If you find something that's so powerful that it's the answer to everything, then that probably does need to be nerfed. But if it's something you use once in a while, then you feel really smart. I mean, that's awesome. That's satisfying.
Yeah. Also, good news. I think we've had it confirmed here that there will be things in the world like undead goo, ground goo, that will help train you for your raiding days when there's lots of goo to deal with and work with your team on. So that's good to know. I'm tired of killing spiders, though, so I need some new content. I'll have to get it in Ghost, I guess.
So far, we don't have any spiders.
Oh, good. Good.
Yeah.
There's a lot right now in
World
of
Warcraft. Crabs, no spiders.
Okay. Sorry. You made me think of it, and I have to ask it. And this is probably... this is probably a dumb question, but World of Warcraft recently added the ability for people with fear of spiders to turn all the spiders in the game, which there are tons of in this expansion, into crabs. Did you have any hand in that, or is anybody there going, oh yeah, remember when Greg was here and we made, everything was about crabs and he was here, is his favorite thing? Do you think there's any connection there that that was your legacy, that they've decided to replace spiders with crabs because of you?
I doubt it. I imagine it was, these things have roughly the same kind of body shape and they both have lots of legs. So rather than replacing a crab with a wolf, that would kind of not make any sense and the animation wouldn't work and stuff like that, it's, the crab is a little bit easier of a swap.
Right.
I did hear, I don't know if I was supposed to know this or not, but I did hear the statistic for how many players turn that feature on.
Yeah. And
I won't share it just in case for some reason Blizzard doesn't want it shared, but it's a sizable number. I thought it would be like a trivial number, but it's like on the same level of like some types of color blindness. So it's a real feature people are using. It's not just a gimmick.
Yeah, you're seeing it in a lot of games now, so I assume it's got real traction as an accessibility feature. We had a guy in our raid though that claims he only does it because it makes him laugh. He just thinks it's funny. Because it's just like lobsters hanging everywhere. It's like very, very different than killing spiders. Someone in the chat says, can Scott talk about him playing in one of the playtests this month, or is he under NDA? I'm under an NDA that I signed to get in, but I haven't played yet. I think probably the next phase is when I'll get in, or whatever that means, the next run.
And to set expectation, I don't think we're going to do a playtest in December, just because we've been running the team really ragged setting up this one. So it'll probably be 2025 before we do another one.
Yeah. So, but suffice it to say, as we mentioned earlier in the episode, a lot more people involved now. Had a larger concurrent number than ever in your last test, and things went really well. So it's looking awesome. Great time for me to get in. So I'm looking forward to it. Can't wait to be able to talk about it on the other side. So look forward to that in our, a couple episodes from now. Really not that long.
The reason we don't talk about it even more is we know there's FOMO out there. We know there are players who want to play test, and we're delighted that there's so much interest, and so we're trying not to rub it in of like, look, these people got in, they're special, and you're a loser because you haven't gotten in yet. But
yeah,
we'll get to the point where we open the floodgates and just about anyone who wants in can come play test.
I after last month's episode, after episode 12 landed, and we were talking about the playtests and how you were going to ramp them up, I got no less than 24 DMs in Discord saying, Scott, how can my raid team get in? How do we do it? How do we get in there? And I'm like, I mean, everyone calm down, breathe. There is FOMO.
Yeah.
People want to play, and I get it. But, give it time. Before you know it, these guys will have all sorts of open slots, and they'll be doing alpha testing in the public, and you'll all have access to it. But patience is the key word right now. All right. Let's dive into... one more thing before we get to Biomes, which I do want to spend the rest of our time talking about. I got an email from somebody named James who asked this question. What are Greg's thoughts on casual players? I come back for each of WoW's expansions, but I don't have time to do all the endgame extensively. I fall behind in the gear curve pretty quickly and stop playing once I see most content. Do you have any ideas about balancing power between the hardcore and the casual players? I think we probably talked about this a little bit before, just in general about, trying to make it a good balance, but anything specific you want to add to that on how we're going to make it good for those more casual solo folks?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of them. And the answer is not make the content so easy that everyone can just completely gear up, because then you kind of lose the motivating factor for the people that are super dedicated and, want to play every week. So the philosophy we're looking at is something like, we call it the 80% rule. I hope that doesn't stick. It's just kind of our rule of thumb right now, which is if you kind of play through the story and just kind of see the content, you should get to like 80% of total available power in the game. And then if you want that remaining 20%, well, that's going to be a commitment. That's going to be, you need to be in a raiding guild. You probably need to raid multiple times a week. You're going to have to kill some of these bosses many, many times to kind of get that remaining 20% of power. And then when a new content comes out, when we make an expansion, those people with that 20% will have a big advantage. They will jump much faster through the content, and then eventually everyone will catch up again as you get kind of close to the end of chapter 2.
Is this close to what others do? Like, is WoW's roughly the 80-20? Is this an industry standard, or is this just what you set for yourselves?
No, I don't think it's an industry standard. I think it's probably a little more generous towards it's just a explicit rule. I think a lot of the games I've worked on, you kind of stumble into it of like, oh yeah, now these players are not happy. Now these other players are not happy. So we just wanted to have a philosophy coming out of the gate so that everyone on the team kind of understood the goals, rather than saying, oh, too many players are raiding, let's make the raids harder, or, oh, too many players are quitting, let's give them a reason to come back. One of the philosophies really embracing is that it's okay if Ghost is not your only game. Right. Because when I was on World of Warcraft, it's a subscription-based game. Sure. We tried really hard to make sure people didn't ever want to leave. And when we saw players start to dip out, we would quickly add new features to kind of reel them back in. Because that, frankly, that was the business model. I like playing lots of games. When a new game comes out, I want to be able to play it. I hate the thought of I have to log into one game every single night. And honestly, League of Legends was the same way. If you take too long of a break for League, you're just gonna drop out of the ranking. Yeah. So we're fine if people take a break from Ghost, if they play it and enjoy it, and now they want to put it down and play something else. It'll still be there on your desktop, and then when a new chapter comes out, you can, we'll welcome you back, and you can jump back in again.
Yeah,
much more like the new season of your favorite TV show came out,
Right.
No one expects you to oh, you love Succession? Well, why don't you watch Succession over and over and over again until the new season comes out? I mean, that's kind of miserable.
I'd never thought about that with the subscription model. I mean, you guys have been pretty clear in the past about you're aiming for retail and then expansion costs, and maybe there'll be a store attached to things, but it won't be. You're not aiming for free to play, and you're not aiming for monthly subscriptions. And it's never occurred to me that the subscription model. Well, I don't know why this didn't occur to me. It seems obvious now, but that's you had to constantly be going, oh crap, we're late into this expansion and people are falling off, and that means they're not paying. Oh shoot, what do we do? I mean, you were there when I think you had a huge hand in LFR, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. That's
better or worse.
That's one of those attempts, though, right? To say, well, if they can get in with, if we can take this middle chunk of what I now understand to be the donut philosophy that Adham had over there at Blizzard, and get them to stay longer, maybe we can do that by giving them some end game content without them having to invest as much or fight as hard, and they won't get as rewarded quite as good, but it's still rewarding and that sort of thing. You won't have to do that dance as much, I guess.
Right, assuming we can make the economics work. If someone buys the box and has a good time, that'll give us enough resources to make another chapter, and then hopefully they buy that chapter. Destiny more or less kind of used this model. And business models kind of come in and out of style. It was loot boxes 5 years ago, and then it was battle passes the last couple of years, and now it seems like it's shifting a little bit back to like, let's just sell the box, kind of old school style. So who knows what it'll be in 4 or 5 years? Could be something different again.
Yeah, I mean, if you have to put yourself in the right context or pull the camera out a little bit to remind yourself that something like a big release like Dragon Age Veilguard is a small miracle in its business model compared to where EA's publishing head was not 5 years ago. It's a complete reversal back to, hey, what if we just sold you the game and didn't make you log into 50 different things and try to make you do some online component, and it's just there. It's just the game. You pay for it. You play it. There's no battle pass like that. I know that game is riddled with stories about it starting as a service game and then changed back and then changed again. And so that's messy in its own way because games take a long time to make. So it makes sense that as those models change, the game would have to adhere to it. But I don't want
Not every game needs to be a live service game.
Right.
Ghost does. It's an MMO. It has to be a live service game, but I think it's fine that not every game is. Yeah,
but not only that, it doesn't have to be live service in the sense that I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example that isn't like this. Like Warcraft, I do appreciate this about World of Warcraft. It launched at $15 a month, and then your breaks if you buy more months and that sort of thing. And it stayed there, right? It didn't inflate. It didn't whatever. And the ways they get around that sometimes is like, well, if you really want to play the token market, or if you want to, buy these mounts you're never going to see in game, these are in store and available to you, or whatever. Those are all these ancillary ways of adding revenue. I get it. The controversial recent one with the giant mount that did all the controversy. Which, by the way, I was not going to buy, and then as soon as I ended a show, a fan bought it for me. So if you see me in game on that thing, I swear to you, I didn't cave to the pressure. Somebody was very nice, and I wasn't going to turn them down. But anyway, the point is, that's how they supplement all of that. I appreciate the consistency of the model. When a game comes out, and even if it's great, it comes out, WildStar, rest in peace, I thought was really great. I really enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. I think you probably knew a bunch of those guys who worked on it. They were all ex-Blizzard people too, although they may have been before your time over there. But anyway, them launching that game in really great shape, super fun to play, lots of great new ideas, but they couldn't compete in the subscription marketplace that at the time WoW dominated so hardcore that just nobody could survive with it. So they converted to free to play. And I think that's when the game started dying, not when people stopped subbing. The reason I think that is because it changes the view of the player that, this just cheapened my experience, right? So if WoW went free to play tomorrow, I think people would go, ugh, even though they suddenly would have to pay less, technically, but they would see it as a cheapening of the product. How much pressure do you feel to lock in on your plan and not budge from it after launch? Because it just seems like that gets them in trouble every time.
If we have to change after launch, like that's okay, and it's kind of a pretty time-honored tradition of sell the game and then discount the game and then maybe make the game free, years down the road. So I wouldn't write that off. Right. What I don't want to do is iterate a lot on the model right now, because it does drive a lot of game design decisions. Like if you're going to have a free-to-play game, you're going to get millions and millions of players, which is awesome, because it's free. They may not spend any money though. So you really have to then figure out, okay, how are we going to get these players to monetize? We're going to have a huge cosmetic shop. Are we going to sell services? You probably need a lot better player behavior tools, because if you kick them out, they could just make a new account and come back in. They're not having to buy their way into the game. So there are just a lot of trade-offs depending on what business model you use.
Well, it's interesting. We'll watch that as it goes. For now, though, we want to dig into some biome stuff. As it turns out, you've been kind of point on deciding how these zones are going to look and feel and act, for lack of a better term. I don't know how often that happens with a studio head, but it does seem like that's very hands-on, and I really like the idea of that. But tell me where some of this is at, just generally, and then maybe we can get into specifics. It seems like one of the harder things to do in the game, or any game, is to say, the zone I'm in right now is a desert zone, and we got all the desert things. There's some lizards you got to fight and get through, and there's these rock formations, and there's really no plants here. But I'm going to go right over the curve over here, and over here is a big jungle zone with mushrooms. That seems harder than it sounds to me, to make that flow, to make it feel right. So
I think it's hard. And the reason I took point on it was I feel like part of my role is to step in when things like cross a lot of different teams and disciplines. Mm-hmm. And this was definitely one of them, because it has a huge art component. It has a huge gameplay component. It has a huge narrative component. And that's hard for any one individual to own, because they feel like they have to work in such close coordination with other teams. But as the game director, I can kind of, I have a little more push there to say like, hey, this is the plan. Happy to hear feedback on it, but you don't have to worry about kind of getting permission, because here it is.
Right. And
because the word we came up with was biome, and I guess I can try to define that as you do want the zone you're in to have a flavor, like this is a desert, or this is a jungle, or this is a swamp. Mm-hmm. We're randomly generating the terrain, but we don't want it to like be like you have no idea what you're going to get. You know, you open up the Christmas present, could be anything inside. Right. We want players to have some idea of, oh, we're heading into the forest, so that is likely to mean like these types of stories and these types of enemies.
Right. So when you see the usual is that every game has to have a very snowy place, has to have a very dry desert place, kind of the Diablo 2 and forward kind of mode of, here's kind of an undead swamp. Now we're going to the desert, and there's some interesting culture shifts there. You know, when you go there, different kind of NPCs, different opportunities to tell story in a different biome. But then everyone's got to have capital cities with beautiful forests, and like all those stereotypes are there. Can you tell us anything about anything you're making where you're like, yeah, we're pushing the limits here. We're taking somebody somewhere you've never seen in a game like this?
What we're trying to do is we want the biomes to be like recognizable that they're from Earth. Mm-hmm. We experimented with some like really unusual things, and what happened was it pushed us out kind of into science fiction. You felt like you were in an alien world, and not even like Star Wars tends to really follow the biome rule of like, it's the ice world, it's the desert world. Mm-hmm. But it felt like, I don't know, like No Man's Sky or something, where they're like, oh, the trees here are giant, purple towers, and all these monsters are like, have 10 legs and stuff like that. Yeah. So we started with something that was rooted in Earth. As one example, one of the starting biomes, I think Faye has talked about this, I'm not like announcing anything, but we call it the Manta Isles, and it is based on like Caribbean islands with like beautiful white sand beaches and blue water, and then the interior is more palm trees, and then finally get to like some mountains and volcanic stuff.
Right.
And we said like, this will be very approachable. Players will understand what this is when they see it, and they'll have some expectations like, oh, maybe crabs are going to come out of the water and I'm going to fight them, and maybe there's like ruins up in the mountains to explore, and all that will be true. But the thing that we did that we really wanted to add the twist there is there are a bunch of manta rays in this biome, and they fly. So they're not in the water, they're out kind of floating around above the water.
Sure.
And so we want to do a lot of everything from, maybe there's jumping puzzles where you can jump on the manta rays, or maybe you can like find one that is doing a big circuit of the zone and kind of hitch a ride to get to different locations. So the vista shot will be, it's a beautiful shot of Hawaii or something with a sunset and stuff, but there's a bunch of manta rays up in the sky.
So
then if someone sees that, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's Ghost. I'm not going to confuse that with any other game I've seen.
So from a philosophical standpoint, ground it in stuff I think this is probably true of any good fantasy though, right? You don't want to go nuts and I don't know. You want that familiarity. You want that Middle Ages if there's any magic at all, it's Merlin, close to the ground type stuff. And then you build out from there. So you can start with your place that looks very familiar, like a very marine wildlife kind of space. But these manta rays are flying. Now the fantasy comes in, and that fantasy is not so far from reality. That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that as an important aspect to this. Like I thought
you want to ground it. You want it to be approachable to players so that they, they might have expectations. If I step into the rainforest, maybe there's some kind of jungle cat there, or maybe a giant snake or a dinosaur. If you make a tropical rainforest and a Caribbean beach, and then there's like zebras running around and then like giant spiders coming out of the water, players they don't know what to think about that. Like it's kind of breaking their suspension of disbelief. It doesn't feel like a real place anymore.
Right. Yeah, that seems really important, and I'm glad to hear that. I don't always love it when an MMO or a game that is meant to be fantasy looks too far beyond its own atmosphere.
Yeah.
And I think Blizzard probably does a decent job of saying, well, Azeroth's a planet and they have some cool stories around it being its own entity, and it's kind of cool, but I don't want I kind of want the what's the word? The lack of education scientifically that you would have in ancient times. If there was magic, great, but you wouldn't know that you're in a star system with like multiple other planets and which sun is yours. And, those kinds of things, when you start messing around in there, it takes me out and makes me go, well, this is like a Star Trek episode where Picard and crew showed up and the people hadn't advanced very far, so they have to be really careful not to break the prime directive or whatever.
Right.
And that's a fun thing to explore, but I don't think in a fantasy MMO, I don't think that's the place to do it. I think it's more fun to focus on the not just the fantasy of it, but the just kind of raw, we don't even know what's across this ocean, let alone what might be 3 towns over or what this king's thinking or whatever. So that's,
and you can do weird stuff and unexpected stuff, but it should be rare. Like you went into a ruin and went too deep into the earth, and now you start to find some weird stuff. But if it's like everywhere, it's just kind of hard to wrap your head around as a player. You're like, I can't connect to this world because it just feels arbitrary and random rather than something that has a believable ecosystem behind it.
Yeah. So speaking of the way biomes work in shards and that sort of thing, we have, or not shards, in blue zones and red zones.
Yeah.
A in our chat asks this just recently. He says, someone explained to me why the world is broken into shards in the artwork. So he's referring to a lot of your concept art where there's like a lot of floating chunks, very Nagrand-like in some ways. Is it a round world or lots of mini-map style shards that you have to teleport around to? Like the actual world itself, I assume, is a big gravitational being with lots of continents and that sort of thing, with perhaps some magical floaties, but that isn't really the blue zone, red zone thing isn't about jumping from a hunk of floating land to another hunk of floating land, right? Like we're talking very different thinking around what those zones mean and why you're going from one to the other. So anyway, maybe just address that in your own way.
It's a great question. Yeah. So we haven't explained this in a lore sense. So I'm not going to spoil anything, and I'm purposely being a little vague here. But if you're an inhabitant of this world, the way you think about history is there probably at one point was a giant planet, and it probably was a planet bigger than Earth, but it had ecosystems like in the tropical regions. There were probably deserts. Deserts usually form outside of mountain ranges where the mountains stop the rain shadow from moving over the plains. Mm-hmm. And then the other places, like when you get up far towards the North Pole and South Pole, you get ice, and before the ice, you probably get these like really tall pine forests. So this was a world, again, maybe bigger than Earth, that looked like that. And then something really bad happened and caused it to shatter apart into probably millions of little pieces. And it wasn't like an explosion, because an explosion would have like destroyed everything. It was something like more rooted in magic. Mm-hmm. And so now, instead of the planet being a big sphere, it's more like the Milky Way, where there's just these shards that go on, it's not literally to infinity, but as far as as a person living there, it's farther than you can ever travel.
Right.
And then we're trying to avoid a lot of teleporting. Like right now in our build, you do literally step through a portal and you appear somewhere else. We think that really breaks up the sense of it all being a unified world. So we're exploring now more transportation, where you would like get on some type of skyboat that would take you from place to place. And the reason I'm hesitating here is we don't want it to be this is not a pirate game where you like outfit your ship and you decide to have cannons and then you're like fighting other airships. Like that's not what the game's about at all. It's more of these are ferries to get you from place to place.
Right. And besides, you could do an expansion 5 years from now that maybe had pirate ship fights. Yeah. So you're saying it's not off the table is what you're saying. So
well, yeah, we'll see.
Interesting.
So once you embrace that kind of stuff, that's kind of what your game is about. And we're not trying to make a game about skyship combat. That's a different game. We're trying to make a game of exploring the shards.
Good point. So can you at this stage tell us how many biomes are either planned in or planned total? Like, are you like with classes, do you have a goal of where you want to hit?
So we came up with 16, which is far too many to make. We want to launch with between 3 and 5, and ideally we launch with as few as 3. But that's the kind of thing that we're gonna have to explore in playtesting. Is like maybe you get tired of seeing the same kind of landscapes over and over again. Like the Manta Isles is beautiful, but maybe you get tired of going there over and over again. You're like, hey, I really need to see something else. So it could be as many as 5. If we ship with fewer of them, we could put a lot more detail into each biome because the biomes come with creatures that only live in that biome. And they also come with like places that can only show up in that biome. And then they all have lists of NPCs that like live in that biome. And you can encounter these NPCs over and over again as you travel around. We call it, I don't know if we've used this word before, we call it the drift, like all of the shards, this kind of galaxy of shards out there. And as you're traveling through the drift, you might run into characters you've met before. And that's a big part of kind of how we tell the story is you might see someone that you haven't seen in a long time and then try to, catch up with them about what's going on in their life.
Well, to get into scale again, and I know you've mentioned it briefly, but I think this is maybe important for some people to get it into their heads, myself included. These aren't shards in the sense that you're standing on a hunk of land and going, well, I can see the edge of that side. I can see, like, you can look around and just tell that you're on a floating island. It's a massive, like, think of, let's say North America, the lower 58, all right, not counting Canada or South America, was a shard. And instead of the ocean surrounding us, it's just the void or the air or the whatever. I can't see the edge from Ohio, but I might if I travel all the way to New York. Are we talking that kind of scale? Are we talking smaller than that? Like,
no, I'll be honest. The ones we're playtesting on now are fairly small, where you could you frequently see the edge, and sometimes there's even like a smaller shard off the main one that you want to reach. Like I said, maybe you build a bridge over to it, or you figure out, you hitch a ride on a manta ray to get over to that smaller shard. So they are, we're going to experiment with bigger ones and see kind of how far we can push them. But right now it feels good for a shard to take, say, an hour, maybe an hour and a half. So they're not massive, but that is something we could experiment with and see how big we can make them. But in terms of scale, yeah, you'll often see over the edge, and you might see another shard below, or you might see different ones on the horizon.
See, I think that's important.
It's a lot more like being kind of island hopping in the Caribbean.
Yeah, I like that, because then that creates all sorts of longing to get there, and you'll have to do things to finish to get there, but you want to see that place. It's like tempting you to go over there and travel there. Yeah. I think that's important.
And some of them will be more like just a big landmass where you kind of forget that there's an edge. But we've also experimented with almost like archipelagos, where it's 4 little islands kind of stuck together, and you can try to jump from one to another, or you can try to, there's a little bit of puzzle solving, like, okay, team, what's the best way to get to that other one out there? Because we think there's an objective there we need.
Yeah. For the chat, I know I said lower 58. I meant lower 48. I know there are not 60 states in America.
I didn't even catch it either.
Yeah. I just ran right past it.
We had an idea early on that maybe we'll make massive shards that you might spend weeks with your friends running around it. And we might still do that, but what we're finding right now is they work really well more for session-based games, like running a dungeon in World of Warcraft. And if you finish it, we'll just go run another one,
So the illustrator, concept artist, college student in my brain wants to ask this question from an art standpoint. If you've got 3 biomes at launch, And those biomes are kind of spread around. You've got multiple shards using the same biome, that kind of thing. So there's, let's say, multiple jungle shards. One of the things I like in games, and MMOs are maybe the best example of this, because the open world experience and exploration is often how you'll run into this. But I love when I'll crest an area that I've been in for a while. I know what I'm looking at. But when I come over a hill, I notice that there's a big burn mark or something. And as I get closer, it's corrupted. It's like got, it's almost like a biome in a biome.
Yeah.
How tempting is that? Or is that part of, I guess, your art direction, is to kind of break things up that way?
Oh, yeah, we definitely have to break things up that way. So I'll talk about another biome, which we call the Witchwood. It's kind of a temperate to cold pine forest, like what you might find in like northern Canada or Russia. So kind of cold, definitely spooky. This is like there are witches running around, things like that. We don't just want it to be uniform pine trees all the time, because then every shard's going to feel the same, and pine trees tend to like block your view of the surrounding landscape.
Right.
So we've broken it up into sub-biomes, and there's the pine forest, but then there's also what we call the riverlands, which is mostly dominated by water. So like lots of, you can imagine big swollen rivers in Canada after the snows melt, and you might have to spend effort crossing the river. And there's fewer trees there because there's just a lot of water. And then the third, we call these subbiomes, oddly enough. The third subbiome is the shaggy hills, which are much more dramatic changes in elevation. And so you can get up into the hills and then kind of look down on these other landscapes. And so we can mix those up a lot. We can have a particular shard that's almost all forest, or another shard that's almost all river with just tiny little bits of forest. And we really hope to break it up so that you see different things every time. And then on top of that, we have, we call them POIs, which is a common game term, just stands for points of interest, where we hand create something and then randomly place it in these maps. And the reason we do that is the way Cam, our tech director, talks about it is you would never have like a randomly generated map create the Lonely Mountain from The Hobbit. Like, it's just very unlikely to create a super iconic, ex-dwarven citadel just out in the middle of nowhere. So what you do is you make that by hand and then you randomly place it. And so that's how we can do things like have castles or towers or volcanoes or, unusual looking things. There is, we have this just long list of stuff that is handmade and then gets randomly added in and then incorporated into the biomes.
Interesting. See, this is the part of the process I love hearing about, because you don't think of it. When you're a gamer, you come around the corner as a player and you just see this rad statue with glowy eyes, and you're like just intrigued, and you're thinking about all the mystery around it. But that may have been one of those you're talking about. Just like,
exactly.
Here's the thing.
We could spend a lot of effort technically making a like random statue generator so the statues are different every time. I just don't know if that's a good bang for the buck. It's better to have like a really good artist make an awesome statue, and then just make sure that your statue library is so extensive that players don't see the same one over and over again. Like, eventually they might see one they've seen before, but hopefully by then they've seen so many other things they've kind of forgotten about it, or it just doesn't grind on them.
Yeah, we got a great response about the from A about the teleporters, and that person is very glad to hear that you're trying to avoid them, because teleporters seem like the easiest answer to anything. It's just like,
I know, it just makes the world feel small, and it's kind of hard to orient yourself around, and it just asks all these questions like, well, if teleportation is trivial, why are there trade routes in a world where like you can just get anything you want at a moment's notice?
Yeah, it does trivialize the distance. And I understand when a game's 20 years old and you got to get places that haven't been relevant for 5 expansions or something like that. Like in WoW's case, I get it. You got to have a room full of teleporters. I got to go to Shatrath. Haven't been there since 2006.
Right.
But
and Shatrath's literally another planet.
Right.
Northrend at least is another continent you could sail across the ocean to.
Ben in the chat asked, to me, Blue Zone sounds similar to roguelite levels. Has the team considered taking other ideas from the roguelite genre to spice up Blue Zones, particularly player power-ups or abilities? Obviously, this gets a little bit more into some gameplay systems, but as a tangential biome question, what do you think of that?
Yeah, 1,000%. We're already doing that. You level up the way you would in any MMO. You gain character levels, but within a particular shard, there's also a progression curve that resets when you go to a new one. And there's different ways to power up. So you do get more powerful over time. And we're kind of, again, with that vibe of breaking the rules. We're fine if you're a little overpowered by the time you finish that shard, because then you're going to go to a new shard and kind of start that part of the journey over while keeping your character levels and your gear and all of that persistent progress.
Have we ever asked, I don't know if we've ever talked about this. Is the plan right now, the world doesn't scale with you, right? We're not talking like ESO style, every level is your level type progression, right? You guys are going to have areas that you're going to see them and go, ugh, I can't go in there yet.
We think it's complicated given our game design, but we don't like the idea that like everything levels up with you. And if, you ding in the middle of a fight and like everything else dings around you, part of getting more powerful is being able to go back to those lower level places and kind of like, oh yeah, I feel great now. These things used to challenge me. Now I crush them.
Yeah.
Now that said, because we are spinning up new shards all the time, when we make a new shard, we can make it whatever level we need to be a challenge for you. Yeah. So then the story progression is how do we make sure that you still feel more powerful? And that has to do with, well, we're not going to like spawn level 100 rats in the level 100 zone, because that just, you were fighting rats when you were a newbie. Why are you still fighting them?
Yeah, but confirmed rats early on. That's what I'm hearing right here.
We actually don't have any rats in the game yet. I feel like if we have a rat catcher, we probably have rats. But
yeah, don't let that deter you rat catcher fans out there. And there's still some rats of some sort coming. Mika in the chat asked something I think is maybe a great place for us to sort of end on. And it also speaks a little bit to your, your history. You're at Riot for a long time, and Riot is having a moment with Arcane Season 2. I haven't seen it yet. My daughter's watching it now and is raving. I can't wait to catch up on it, but it says this. Speaking about the lore, seeing the massive success of Arcane, the series set in the League of Legends universe, is the team crafting the lore with the idea in mind that it might also turn into a series one day? Or let's add to that movie or one-off specials or animated shorts or whatever. Are you looking at from the lore perspective at this as being a potential IP that we could do more with down the road?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. The core team that I took from Riot to come to make FPC was like the IP development team. So they're all very excited about that opportunity of being able to create a world from scratch that players love and want to spend time in and want to hear more about. Honestly, one of my frustrations at Riot was they were kind of so risk adverse that they were reluctant to take a lot of chances on let's tell a lot of stories through different media. So I want to go nuts with that kind of stuff and just see what works. Like maybe we try comics and players don't like comics, so we stopped doing that.
Sure.
Arcane is enormously expensive to make, so it will be a long, long time before we would take something on of that magnitude. Yeah. But I mean that's the goal, right? If you can make a world and characters and stories so compelling that players want to experience them even outside of the game, then you've created a franchise. You've created something with meaning to players at that point.
Yeah, that seems like the end all be all dessert of this work is that you could end up establishing something that stands the test of time, like Lord of the Rings, like World of Warcraft, like the World of Elder Scrolls. Like these are massive hits, and those hits usually lead to this sort of thing. The interesting thing about Arcane, though, is that not a lot of people are thinking about Arcane lore, or League of Legends lore prior to Arcane, partly because for a long time there wasn't any. They were kind of archetypes pulled out of Warcraft originally and then kind of tweaked and whatever. So in a weird way, they kind of brute forced that to a great, like, to success. I don't mean that as a pejorative. We're talking more of an organic, like, let's grow this thing and see what happens on the other side, I guess, from Ghost perspective.
And again, I don't, it feels very arrogant to compare ourselves to Lord of the Rings, World of Warcraft, or Arcane. I mean, those are, decades of success behind them, and we're just starting out. But one of the things I love about the world we're making is that it is made specifically to support this game, whereas World of Warcraft had to twist itself around the rules of the universe that were already put in place for the RTS games. Right. Likewise, like League of Legends was a MOBA, and Arcane has to break some rules and take some liberties in order to tell their stories. Just for example, there are a whole lot of characters in Piltover and Zaun that Arcane wisely does not include because it already has such a huge cast of characters. But then you see players out there, they're like, well, I love Camille, I love Twitch, I love Urgot. Why aren't they in Arcane? Assuming they're not in the last 3 episodes, which
maybe they will. We don't know.
The scripts when I was at Riot, but who knows if they've changed since then.
Oh, interesting. So you saw a lot of this on paper anyway, a long time before.
Yeah, I was really involved with all of this stuff. It was super fun.
That's great. Okay, one final question from Stretch in the chat who says, will there be reasons for people to go back to lower level zones later in the game?
So the reason I'm hesitating is part of the idea behind the blue zones is that once you finish a blue zone, you kind of leave it and it kind of settles back into the drift. And part of the reason we want to do that for technical reasons is we literally cannot afford to have like every zone you've ever made like saved off on servers forever. That gets to be like ludicrously expensive. Yeah. We will let players save off a few places they really like, places they want to go back to. So we do have an answer for people who are like, but I really love this place. I want to come back to it again.
Right.
Where we're going to do that more often is in the red zones, which are more traditional MMO zones where you'll see lots and lots of other players. And there we do want to have the quests, even the reward systems to some extent, send you back to some of those old places, if nothing else, to kind of see how they've changed and see, kind of catch an update with the story.
I hadn't really thought about the digital real estate involved with keeping zones as they are forever in perpetuity, the way that other MMOs do this. It's just not a thing players think of because we just think it's all there. Just there.
Elwyn Forest, it's static. Like as a player, you go in and you kill Hogger, but Hogger is going to respawn a few seconds later. Like the data is stored and they don't have to preserve it for very long. They're really only preserving your characters.
Right.
We don't have that luxury. We have to like preserve the whole world state because part of the promise is if you like kill the boss, it doesn't come back. And if you chop down the tree, it doesn't come back. So,
right.
And the zones are generated randomly and we can generate, hundreds of thousands of them, so we can't save every single one of them, or the game will get far too expensive to run quickly.
Do you feel any pressure at this stage to talk about either internally or externally about housing, since everyone's talking about housing now? Because after 20 years, WoW is going to finally do an attempt at housing. And people
excited to see them try. There was always so much resistance there because the problem they could never solve was, what role does the housing serve?
Right.
If the housing means you no longer go to Stormwind or Ironforge anymore, well, then the cities are kind of dead. If they're just for cosmetic reasons, what's the point? So I'm really interested to see how they solve that from a gameplay standpoint.
Yeah, there's got to be more.
We have a good solution that's kind of built in to Ghost because, as I was just saying, you can, if you find a shard you really like, and usually I'm imagining it's because it's beautiful and you just like the vibe, you can keep it as your home shard, and then you can put buildings on there and they will stay. But we're really incorporating that into the story so that we can do things like an NPC can come visit you on your home shard, because sometimes you want to find an NPC and you don't want to just wander the drift forever until you locate them. So they can come visit you. And we're planning on baking stuff like that into the design up front rather than having it be something that we add on later.
That's a pretty cool way of doing it, I think.
Because we already have building in the game, so then like building something pretty that's like your village or your house is a lot easier for us than starting over from scratch.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, I think that sounds great. I feel like we gleaned a lot out of this episode at this stage of the game. Stuff I hadn't even thought about asking before it came out, thanks to some of these chat questions and Greg opening up about how biomes work. And it sounds like this sounds like a fun part of the process. I assume you're having a blast right now with that. It must be great.
I am. It's super. You know what? I've shared this with the team the other day, but after all the playtests, one of our lead engineers said, I hope you feel proud. And I thought about that for a minute. I'm like, like, yeah, I guess I do. Like a year ago, this was just all on paper, and now it's a game, and we've got a great team, and players are having fun. So like, that's a really great feeling, and not just for myself, but for like, this group of people that we put together, what they've been able to accomplish is kind of staggering.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't I don't want to be all arrogant about it, but it was really nice to see.
Well, you got a dream team for sure. And talking about this stuff just jazzes me and gets me excited for everything. It just makes me want to play games right now. That's all I want to do. Well, this is great. Greg, once again, per usual, wonderful episode. We'll be back next month with another. Not sure when it'll be in December. We'll pick a good date so it doesn't interfere with a lot of people's schedules and bring you a little more information.
I don't know if we can pull it off, but Faye and John have big plans for the December episode, so we'll see.
Ooh, okay, that's exciting. I haven't had the details leaked to me yet, but I can't wait cool. To hear that. So we will find out soon. We'll let you guys know. Thank you for your questions, for your participation in hanging out with us today. And if you have any thoughts in the meantime, use this number. It's a great way to text us or voicemail us. 801-471-0462. We're happy to read and play that stuff on the show live. We also try to retain any questions from the chat we may have missed. So watch for those perhaps coming up. And what else? Oh, go to the website, frogpants.com/street is where you can get the podcast. And if you're looking for all things Fantastic Pixel Castle and Ghost and its progress, check out fantasticpixelcastle.com. It's going to do it for us. For me and Greg, we'll see you next time.
Oh, looks like someone just got their ears caught in the audio cookie jar. It's okay. You can have another and another after that at frogpants.com.